Greetings, class. This week we're going to go over the first 3 stories from the Interpretive Melodies. And the first book, A Temporary Matter, I love this story. I think it's so well written. And what happens is we have a couple. We have Shukumir, who's a woman, female in the story, and we have Shoba, who is a husband. And they've grown apart. They've grown apart. And the story opens where their electricity cut off. It cuts off. And it never quite comes back on. And they're at a place in this marriage, we find out on page 3 that they tried to have a baby and the baby died. And that had a tremendous impact on this couple. And it made them drift apart. But as the story goes on, yeah, you can see a little bit where they've grown apart. Like page 6, it says she kept bonuses from her job and separate bank accounts in her name, etc., etc. So this is a couple that's drifting apart. She's working a lot. She's not home that much. And as the story progresses, the electricity never comes back on. And they start having conversations in the dark. And they start delivering their secrets. She tells him that one night she said she was going to work late and she actually went out for a drink with another guy. Nothing happened, but she went out for a drink with another guy. And he tells her that, that he had a fantasy with a woman in a magazine and he cut it out. I think the story is written a long time ago, but he cut it out, and, he never told her about that, and he felt that he was having an affair, and he didn't like those feelings. And so they have these honest, heart-to-heart moments in this dark space, and it brings them together. And I think that's really, really powerful, that they have to move. A lot of times we say, there's a phrase that says we have to bring things into the light. But in here, they have to go into the darkness and share their stories. And when the light, and then they keep delivering all these different stories to one another. And then he tells her about the day the baby died, and how he's holding this baby while she was asleep, and he's looking at it, and he's holding it for as long as he can until the nurse has to take it away. And it's a really powerful ending of this story. And I like page 22. I love the last lines. They wept together for things they now knew. So this story starts out, they've drifted apart. They might be on the brink of a divorce or separation, but it's through sharing this honesty and vulnerability that they really come together. And another thing to note is this is an immigrant couple. They were excited to bring this baby into the world and share their cultures and customs with them, to have this identity with this baby. Now this baby's gone, and they had to work through it. So I think I love this story. I think it's a great story. And it's a very subtle story. And it has a clear beginning, middle, and end. It has the 2 characters. They're fighting against one another in the beginning, and then the climax is this baby. They realize what happens, and it brings them together. And I think that last line just shows that they're going to work this out. They're going to be okay. And they had to grieve. They had to grieve together. And I also like how they started getting used to the dark. There was one point in the story where he's like, I hope when I come home tonight it was dark and we can just light candles and be together and be intimate. And she starts coming home earlier and earlier to spend time. And I like that idea. I think that's a great metaphor for this story. If we look at the second story, I might be pronouncing things wrong. This one's written in first person. It's about a girl whose name is Lilia. She's younger. And then we have a man who's from another country. He's from Pakistan. His country was invaded by India, and he's basically lost his town. His name is Mr. Perzada. And he's a very caring husband. He has daughters who are stationed, my dad was in the military, so I say stationed, but they live overseas, so he's grown apart. And he's just worried about his children and his family. He watches the news, and he's trying to keep up. And so this family, who's also Indian, they just invite him over, and they just want to spend time with them to make sure he's okay. And I see a lot of culture clash in this story, and a lot of revelations about culture and belonging and assimilation and conformity, while also non-conformity, just holding on to identity and beliefs. And I like this division where Pakistan is divided between India, and there's also a division between their world as immigrants and the world they live in, which is America. And so he basically comes, he's Muslim, she's never met a Muslim, she's never seen a person like this, and he's explaining his story, so she's learning a lot about him. And I like these small passages on page 27. It says, things she learns in school, Plymouth Rock, Bunker Hill, George Washington. So she's learning all these things about American history, essentially white history, but she's not learning about her culture. So now she has this opportunity of having a stranger in her house to explain a world that she doesn't know that's also part of her heritage. And I think that's very, very powerful. Let's see. I love the character of Mr. Prasada. He's a very caring person. I love how he carries a leaf in his pocket. He always has something to give to this little girl, usually candy. And he sees in this little girl his daughter. They form this connection, right? Let's see. There's a lot of nice details in this story. Another part about conformity and non-conformity in history is on page 33, where the teacher is talking about the Mayflower. It says in the middle of page 33, but I could not concentrate. I returned to the blonde wood shelves, to a section I had noticed labeled Asia. I saw books about China, India, Indonesia, Korea. Eventually I found a book titled Pakistan, A Land and Its People. So she starts moving away from the history that she's learning in school, and she starts to become interested in the history of herself, her people. And I like that shift. It's such a great shift, and it shows exploration. And she's buying into something new. She's not conforming to societal standards. She's holding on to her identity and history. I think that's very powerful. And on page 35, they try to make a jack-o'-lantern. This guy's never seen a pumpkin. He doesn't understand Halloween. And so they try to make a jack-o'-lantern. They do it, and they cut out the, it's a great metaphor, actually. It's on page 36. I love this description. It says, what resulted was a disproportionately large hole the size of a lemon, so that our jack-o'-lantern wore an expression of plastered astonishment, the eyebrows no longer fierce, floating in frozen surprise above a vacant geometric gaze. I love that line because it's kind of metaphor for them. They're stuck in this world that they don't quite understand. They're trying to fit in. They're kind of in shock by it. And that jack-o'-lantern that they make also represents that. I think that's such a clever metaphor. She's a good writer. She's a great writer. Let's see. Near the end of the story, on page 41, he does go back to his wife and his family. They're okay. And the whole time he's been giving her candy. Every time he comes to visit, she eats candy. And on that, when she finds out, it says, it was only then, raising my water glass in his name, I knew what it meant to miss someone who was so many miles and hours away. Just as he had missed his wife and daughters for so many months, he had no reason to return to us. My parents predicted correctly, but we would never see him again. Since January, each night before bed, I continued to eat, for the sake of his family, a piece of candy I'd saved from Halloween. That night there was no need to. I eventually threw them away. So he's okay. It's not like she's throwing him away, but she doesn't have to pray for him anymore. She doesn't have to pray for his safety. And she later finds out in the story that he's a Muslim, and through talking to him, she starts to pray. And again, it's not about religion or indoctrination in this story. It's really remembering where you come from and identifying with that, rather than what you're seeing in the culture in which you live in. So I think that's very clever. It's a very good story, and I think that I did a lot to point out non-conformity. These people are trying to conform in a world that they don't understand, and they're trying to hold on to their identity. That's the keys to this story. And then we're gonna do one other story. This is the title of the book, The Interpreter Melodies. This is a wild story, and I love the way it works out because it starts out unpredictable, right? We have this family who is visiting India. They are Indian, but they live elsewhere in America, and they're kind of outsiders, and it's a family, and they're driving in this car with an interpreter. He's like a tour guide, right? And they're driving to this temple. And we have three main characters. We have Mr. Das, Mrs. Das, who are the married couple. We have Mr. Kapasi. I think I'm saying his name correctly. But he's a driver. And we start to get a little bit more sense of who these people are. They have children. They have a daughter and 2 sons, Ronnie and Bobby. I think we start to get a sense of the woman's character. Page 48. On page, yeah. The mother comes off a bit cold. Like on page 48 it says the little girl stuck out a hand. Mine too, Mommy, do mine too. Leave me alone, Miss Doss said, blowing on her nail and turning her body slightly. You're making me mess up. So if you look at how the woman treats her children, she's a little bit cold to them. She's cold throughout the entire story to them. And so they're driving. And it almost seems like they're going to have an affair or something. Like this driver, he's infatuated with this woman. And he's able to see some of his own relationship with her. And he's romanticizing all these things with her. And the more he romanticizes things, the closer she gets. Like there's one part of the story where the kids and the husband all get out of the car. And he expects her to go with him. But she decides to stay. Right? So it builds up, so it seems like there's going to be a climax where there's going to be some romantic intrigue or something happening, I don't know, romantically, but it doesn't really happen. We'll explain that in a moment. Another thing is they're taking photos. They're taking photos, and they want to send some of the photos to him for Christmas cards, and she asks for the address and things like that. And while they're driving, he also admits that he's an interpreter. He's an interpreter. But he's an interpreter for a doctor, right? And so he goes with the doctor and he interprets the doctor's words to the patients. And then what happens near the end of the story is the husband and the kids get out of the car. They're gonna walk, and monkeys and all these other things. They're gonna go venture. But the woman decides to stay in the car. And while she's in the car, she says something very, very powerful. She says that she had an affair, that one of these kids is not her own. If you read the story carefully, it says that Bobby is paler than the other son. So there's already some mention of that. But she says this guy came to her house, a friend of her husband's, and basically, they consummated and had an illegitimate child, and she never told her husband. And she's been keeping this inside her whole entire life. And because he's an interpreter, she asks him, can you interpret what all of this means? And he's like, and she expects him to have some grand answer. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm not that kind of interpreter. I'm not like a psychic or something like that, or a soul reader. I'm just an interpreter. And she gets really, really upset with him. And I love his response. It's on page 66. It's so apt and so great. Because he seems like he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he nails it with this line. He says, is it really pain you feel, Mrs. Doss, or is it guilt? And so the reason why she's mean to her children, she's dismissive, she doesn't want to be around, isn't because she doesn't love them, but she doesn't love herself for what she did. She feels guilt. And when he tells her that, she gets really upset. She's like, and she jumps out of the car. She's like, I can't talk to you. And they go to find the kids, and they found out that Bobby is being attacked by monkeys. He's being beaten with sticks. And it's almost like a metaphor for the self-mutilation she's done to herself. She's been beating up herself all these years from this. And now she's probably been mean to this child as well, because it's not her husband's child. So I think that the punishment, or the punishment comes at the end, and it kind of symbolizes her own torment and this family's torment, the fact that she hasn't been able to tell. And then at the very end of the story, he sees his address blowing in the wind, and he realizes he'll never have another this connection with his family is done. They're never going to write him. They're never going to send him photographs, right? This one doesn't tie into conformity as much as the others, but it does. All the stories in this book are about immigrants. And so they're going back to their country. They're trying to identify with their homeland, and they've kind of lost root. They've been caught up in Western culture, and they've kind of lost their way. And looking for this person who is an Indian to help translate and interpret the way they feel their lives should be interpreted based on their culture, and he's just honest. And it's a very, very powerful story. It's extremely well written. And again, this is a summary of the 3 stories. I'm sure you'll find a lot of gems in these stories once you read them yourself, but looking at narrative structure, she has it. She has a setting, she has a character development, rising action, climax, resolution in every story you'll read. And she's a powerful storyteller. So I hope you guys enjoy these stories. Thank you.